They tried to frighten the human girl. Then she showed them how Deathworld kids play. The station had never been this quiet before. Galactic Concord Station was one of the busiest places in the known galaxy. Every single day, hundreds of alien species walked its long metal corridors. Delegates, traders, scientists, diplomats, all kinds of beings moved through its halls, talking loudly, arguing, laughing in their own strange ways. The station hummed with life, with noise, with the smell of 100 different worlds all mixed together. But when the transit pod from Sector 9 docked at Gate 11, something happened that had never happened before. A human stepped out. Her name was Yuna. She was 23 years old, born in the Siberian industrial sectors of Earth, raised in a place where the cold killed the weak and the wildlife tested everything else. She stood at the gate with a single bag over her shoulder, wearing plain gray clothes, her dark hair pulled back simply. She looked around the station with calm, curious eyes, the way someone looks when they walk into a new room and want to understand it before they say anything. She was not tall. She was not armored. She carried no weapon. By every standard that the aliens of the Concord used to measure strength, she appeared to be nothing. Small, soft, fragile. The corridor around Gate 11 slowly filled with silence. Aliens stopped walking. They turned to look. Word had spread through the station days before her arrival. A human was coming. Most of them had only read about humans in database files. Deathworld species, endurance predators, biology built by a planet that never stopped trying to kill its own children. But reading about something and seeing it standing in front of you were two very different things. What they saw was a young woman who looked completely unbothered. The Vreth delegation was already waiting near the gate. They had arrived early, which was unusual for them. The Vreth did not normally make an effort to greet anyone. They were tall creatures, taller than most species on the station, with wide shoulders and long arms, and skin that shifted in deep blue and violet tones. Across their necks and upper backs grew wide bioluminescent frills, colorful, bright, capable of expanding to nearly twice their resting size. In Vreth culture, those frills were everything. They communicated status, emotion, and most importantly, dominance. When a Vreth spread its frills wide and bright, smaller creatures ran. It was a biological fact across dozens of worlds where the Vreth had made contact. Commander Orok stood at the front of his delegation. He was older than the others, bigger, and his frills had more gold threaded through the blue than anyone else in the group. He had held his rank for 30 years. He had made ambassadors flinch, made security chiefs step aside, made creatures twice his size look away first. He watched the human girl walk through the gate. She was looking at the station ceiling, studying the architecture with a calm expression, like she found it interesting rather than overwhelming. She noticed the Vreth blocking the main corridor, and she stopped. She looked at Orok. She looked at his frills, then she looked at the others behind him. Orok spread his frills. It was slow, deliberate, and full. The gold and blue light flooded the corridor in waves, pulsing in the aggressive pattern that his species used to signal a clear and simple message. You are small, I am large, and you should be afraid. The aliens nearby who saw it took a step back instinctively. Even the station security officer standing at the far end of the hall shifted his weight uncomfortably. Yuna tilted her head. She studied the display for a moment, the way someone might study an interesting painting. Then she said, "Cool colors," and walked around him. Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. Orok's frills slowly folded back in. He turned and watched her walk down the corridor, bag over her shoulder, completely relaxed, already looking at the next interesting thing she had spotted on the ceiling. His subordinate Dren moved close to him and spoke in a low voice. "She is not afraid." "I noticed," Aurak said. "Do you think she did not understand the display?" Aurak was quiet for a moment. In 30 years, he had never had to answer that question. "She understood," he said finally. "She simply did not care." The station's assigned liaison for Yuna was a Calthian named Rovi. Calthians were small creatures, roughly the same height as humans, but much thinner, with large pale eyes and a natural nervousness that made them very good at anticipating problems before they happened. Rovi had been given this assignment because he was considered good at handling difficult situations. He had spent the last week reading everything available about humans. He was not fully prepared. He met Yuna at the end of the main corridor and introduced himself quickly, apologizing in the same breath for the Vreth blocking the gate. "They are not usually stationed here," he said. "I believe they came specifically to observe your arrival. I am sorry if they were uncomfortable." Yuna looked at him. "They were uncomfortable?" Rovi blinked his large pale eyes. I meant if they made you uncomfortable." "They didn't," she said simply, and then she asked him where the food hall was, because she had been traveling for 16 hours and she was hungry. Rovi walked with her through the station, watching her carefully, the way someone watches a situation they do not fully understand. She asked good questions about the station's layout, about who lived in which section, about the rotation schedule for the artificial gravity. Normal questions, practical questions, the kind of questions someone asked when they wanted to understand a place so they could move through it well. She did not seem nervous. She did not seem awed. She seemed interested, which was different. At the food hall, she sat down with a plate of something Rovi had selected that was reportedly compatible with human biology, and she ate it without complaint, even though Rovi privately thought it tasted like warm metal. She looked around the food hall at the different alien species eating their meals, and she watched them with the same calm attention she had given the ceiling architecture. "Has anyone from Earth been here before?" she asked. "No," Rovi said. "You are the first." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that information away for later. "Good," she said. "Then nobody has any bad habits about us yet." Rovi did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Across the food hall, at a corner table, Dren sat alone and watched the human girl eat her meal. His frills were folded flat. He was thinking carefully. Aurak had given him a quiet instruction after the gate incident. Find out what she fears. Every species feared something. Fear was the oldest language in the galaxy. You just had to find the right word. He would find hers. He was patient. And the human girl did not know yet that someone was already studying her the way a hunter studies terrain before the season begins. She finished her meal, thanked Rovi, and asked him to show her to her quarters. She slept well that first night. She always did. They tried to frighten the human girl. Then she showed them how Deathworld kids play. Dren was thorough. That was the thing about him. He never rushed, and he never guessed. He spent the first 2 days simply watching. He watched Yuna walk the station corridors in the morning, always taking slightly different routes, always looking at things carefully. He watched her in the food hall, where she tried different things from the menu each day, and made small notes in a battered paper notebook she carried in her jacket pocket. He watched her in the common areas, where she sometimes sat alone reading, and sometimes sat near other species, and just observed them with that quiet, patient attention she seemed to give everything. He gathered information the way a scientist gathers data. She was alone most of the time. Rovi was with her for the official parts of her day, meetings, orientation briefings, protocol sessions. But the rest of the time, She moved through the station by herself. She did not seem lonely. She seemed comfortable with her own company in a way that Dren found unusual. Most species, when placed in an unfamiliar environment surrounded by creatures they had never seen before, showed signs of stress. Elevated movement, avoidance, clustering near familiar things. Yuna did none of that. On the third day, Dren began the first test. It started small. He had access to the station's environmental systems through a contact in the maintenance division. Nothing illegal, just carefully arranged. He began with recorders. At night, when the station shifted to its low light cycle and most of the inhabitants were resting, he introduced a low-frequency sound into the ventilation system connected to her room. It was below the hearing range of most species, but calibrated specifically for human ears. A deep, irregular vibration that the psychological database described as instinctively unsettling to Earth mammals. Something between a growl and a groan. The kind of sound that made ancient parts of a brain whisper danger without explaining why. He checked the monitoring feed the next morning, expecting to see that she had slept poorly, moved around a lot, maybe requested a room change. The feed showed her sleeping soundly, from lights out to morning cycle, without interruption. He stared at the data for a long time. He increased the frequency the second night, pushing it closer to audible range. He added a secondary element, a very slight and irregular fluctuation in the air pressure, barely noticeable, the kind of thing that made enclosed spaces feel subtly wrong without any clear reason. He had used this combination on a Pelthian delegate 2 years ago. The Pelthian had requested a transfer off the station within 48 hours. The next morning, Yuna walked into the food hall looking completely rested, ordered something with a lot of protein, and told Rovi the ventilation in her room made interesting sounds at night. "Is it bothering you?" Rovi asked, worried. "No," she said. "It kind of helps, actually. Reminds me of the pipes back home." Rovi did not know what to say to that either. He was beginning to realize this was going to be a recurring problem. Dren reported back to Aurak after the first week. "The environmental approach is not working," he said. Aurak sat with his frills folded and his expression still. He had the kind of stillness that came from long practice. The stillness of someone who had learned that showing frustration was a form of losing. "Explain." "She is not responding to subconscious pressure," Dren said. "The sounds, the air fluctuation, she either does not register them as threats, or she registers them and dismisses them immediately. Either way, the result is the same." What about isolation? Dren had tried that too. For 3 days, he had quietly arranged for the common areas she preferred to be occupied by species known to be socially aggressive toward outsiders. Not violent, but cold, territorial, the kind of creatures that made others feel unwelcome through pure social pressure. He had expected her to withdraw, to start keeping to her quarters, to show the signs of someone who felt they did not belong. Instead, she had sat down next to a group of Kethari merchants, large, gray-skinned, famously unfriendly to non-Kethari, and asked them, with genuine curiosity, what they were trading. The Kethari, caught completely off guard by the directness, had answered. By the end of the week, 2 of them were showing her something on their datapad, and she was making notes in her little paper notebook. "Isolation is also not effective," Dren said. Aurak was quiet. Then he said, "She is building a map." Dren looked at him. "Commander? Every day she walks different paths. Every day she talks to different species. She is not sightseeing. She is learning the station." He paused. "She is treating this like survival preparation." Dren considered that. It was an uncomfortable thought. On the 9th day, Dren changed his approach. He arranged for the lights in Yuna's corridor to malfunction. Not completely, just enough to flicker irregularly in the section between her quarters and the nearest corridor junction. Flickering lights in enclosed spaces triggered stress responses across a wide range of species. It was something about the unpredictability, the suggestion of failing systems, the way it made the familiar suddenly feel unsafe. He watched the feed that evening as she walked back to her quarters after dinner. She reached the flickering section, stopped, and looked up at the lights. She watched them for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket, pulled out a small tool. Where she had gotten the tool from, Dren did not know. She must have traded for it, or borrowed it from somewhere. And she climbed up onto the wall panel handhold, opened the light fixture casing, looked inside, made a small adjustment, and the flickering stopped. She climbed back down, put the tool away, and walked the rest of the way to her quarters. Dren sat in his monitoring room for a very long time afterward. He thought about what Aurak had said. She is treating this like survival preparation. And he thought about what that meant, that she had come to this station, a place completely foreign to her, surrounded by species she had never met. And her response had not been fear or withdrawal or stress. Her response had been to learn it, to map it, to understand it well enough to fix its problems with a borrowed tool and steady hands. He thought about Earth. He had read the files, a planet where the weather alone killed thousands every year, where the animals were fast and numerous, and many of them large enough to end a human life in seconds, where even the water in certain places carried things that could kill you slowly from the inside. Humans had not just survived that. They had built cities on it. They had spread across every environment it offered. They had looked at the things that were supposed to kill them and turned them into background noise. He was beginning to understand that you could not frighten something that had already made peace with danger. He sent a message to Aurak that night. "We need a different approach." Aurak read it and did not reply immediately. He sat in his quarters and thought for a long while. Then he made a decision. Subtle would not work. Psychology would not work. They needed something real. Something that even a human girl from a Deathworld would have a genuine biological response to. He knew exactly what to use, and he was certain, absolutely certain, that this time it would work. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. They tried to frighten the human girl. Then she showed them how Deathworld kids play. The Kaveth serpent was not a small creature. It was roughly 4 meters long, thick through the middle, with dark red and black scales that shifted like oil on water when it moved. Its head was wide and flat, its eyes a pale, cold yellow, and when it opened its mouth, the inside was a deep blue-black, with 4 overlapping rows of teeth that curved slightly inward, the kind of teeth designed not just to bite, but to hold. It came from a jungle world at the edge of Concord space, a place where even the Vreth sent their warriors to train, because the environment was considered genuinely dangerous by galactic standards. In the 3 prior incidents, when Kaveth serpents had gotten loose in populated areas, the result had been immediate mass evacuations. On a Pelthian colony ship, it had caused a full emergency shutdown. On the Grenthian research station, it had taken 6 armed security officers and a containment team with heavy equipment nearly 4 hours to locate and secure a single animal. The psychological impact had lasted months. Dren had arranged everything carefully. He had contacts in the Biological Transport Division. Creatures moved through the station regularly as part of research transfers and exotic trade shipments. A single Kaveth serpent in a mislabeled container accidentally released into the lower maintenance corridor during a routine check. It would look like an error. A terrible, unfortunate error. Nothing traceable back to the Vreth delegation. And the human girl, whose quarters were in the lower residential section that shared ventilation and access corridors with the maintenance level, would certainly encounter it. Every species encountered that creature the same way. It was not about intelligence or bravery. Something in the ancient wiring of most living things, something deep and automatic, that said large predator, no escape route, run. You could not train that response away. You could not reason your way out of it in the moment. It simply happened. Dren was confident. He released the serpent at the start of the evening cycle. The alarm went off 11 minutes later. The station's automated systems had picked up an anomalous biological signature in lower corridor 7. Emergency lights shifted to amber. An automated voice began repeating a calm but firm evacuation instruction through the public address system. In the main residential areas above, doors opened, and aliens poured out into the corridors, moving quickly toward the designated safe zones, expressions ranging from alarmed to outright panicked. In a security monitoring room, the officer on duty, a heavy-set Brouthian named Bacon, pulled up the corridor feeds immediately. He had been working station security for 12 years, and he had handled a lot of unusual situations. But what he saw on the feed made him sit up very straight. Lower Corridor 7 was on his screen, amber-lit and empty, except for two things. One was the Kaveth serpent, moving slowly along the corridor wall, its head raised and scanning, yellow eyes catching the light. The other was Yuna, walking toward it. She was not running. She was not backed against a wall. She was moving with a slow, deliberate calm, slightly crouched, her eyes fixed on the serpent's head. She had her jacket tied around her left forearm. She had done it quickly, the way someone does a thing they have thought about doing before they actually need to do it. Bacon grabbed his comm. Human representative, please respond. There is an uncontained biological hazard in your corridor. Please move toward the nearest. Her voice was quiet and completely level. Please move away from... Is it venomous? Bacon blinked. He checked his screen. He pulled up the biological file with hands that were not quite steady. The Kaveth serpent, relies primarily on constriction. The toxin profile is, it has a mild paralytic in the saliva, but the primary danger is constriction. Got it, she said. So front end is the priority. Yes, technically. Please, we are sending a containment team. Please do not approach. How long for the team? Bacon checked. The containment team was on the far side of the station, had to collect equipment, had to route around the evacuating population. Approximately 40 minutes, perhaps. I'll handle it, she said. On the screen, Bacon watched her get closer. It raised its head higher, tongue flickering, body beginning to coil in the way the species did when it was deciding between retreat and engagement. It was large enough that the decision did not take very long. It chose engagement. Its head drew back. Yuna stopped. She went completely still. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the serpent's head came forward, and Yuna's left arm came up, the jacket-wrapped arm, and took the strike against the padded layers. And in the same motion, before the serpent could pull back and reposition, her right hand came down, and she grabbed it behind the jaw. Clean, practiced, fast. The serpent thrashed. It was 4 meters long and powerful, and it twisted its body hard, trying to use its mass. She moved with it, not against it, keeping the head controlled, letting it work itself through the motion until it had less energy left. She had both hands on it now, behind the jaw where it could not get angle, and she held on with the patient, steady grip of someone who understood that the animal was not evil, just scared. And that scared animals tired themselves out if you gave them time and didn't give them anything to actually bite. 2 minutes and 14 seconds after she grabbed it, the serpent was still. Not dead, just calm, or at least tired enough to stop fighting. She was holding it out from her body, both hands steady, and she looked directly at the security camera above the corridor. I need a box, she said. Something with a secure lid, medium to large. Bacon realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out slowly. I will, yes, I will have someone bring... Make it fast. I don't want to hold this all night. They brought her a container from the maintenance storage. She put the serpent inside, closed the lid, and held it shut until Bacon's team arrived with proper sealing equipment. While she waited, she sat on the corridor floor with the container between her knees, one hand resting on the lid, and she looked completely unbothered. One of the junior security officers, young, Talthian, still clearly shaken, stared at her, and finally said, "How did you know how to do that?" Yuna looked up at him. "My uncle has a farm on the Ob River Basin," she said. "There are rat snakes the size of this thing living in the grain storage every summer. You learn." She paused. "Actually, this was easier. The ones back home are faster." The junior officer had no response to that. He wrote it carefully, noting the suspicious nature of an accidental release in a corridor that happened to be adjacent to the human representative's quarters, noting that the biological transport records did not match the manifest for that container, noting a number of other small things that did not add up. He also noted, in the final section where officers were invited to include personal observations, that the human representative had responded to an active Kavith serpent with more composure than some of his veteran security officers would have managed. Then he marked the container she had labeled, in plain handwriting on a piece of paper she had stuck to the lid, and stared at it for a moment. The label read, "Do not open, snake." They tried to frighten the human girl. Then she showed them how Deathworld kids play. The story of the serpent moved through the station the way all good stories do, fast and growing with each telling. By the morning after the incident, most of the station knew. By the afternoon, the details had been passed between species who didn't even share a common language, communicated through gestures and translated fragments, and the universal method of one person miming picking something up and another person making a large, alarmed gesture with their arms. By evening, Yuna could not walk through the food hall without feeling the particular kind of attention that comes from being something other people are trying to understand. She did not seem to mind. She moved through it the same way she moved through everything, calmly, paying attention, noting things in the small notebook she still carried. Rovi found her in the observation deck that evening, standing at the wide, curved window that looked out over the starfield, the notebook open in one hand. He had spent the day managing the fallout from the incident, and he looked for a Calthian like someone who had been wrung out and hung up to dry. "You should know," he said carefully, "that the incident is being investigated. The container records don't match what they should. Security Officer Bacon has filed a very thorough report." "I know," Yuna said. Rovi hesitated. "You know who arranged it?" It was not quite a question. Yuna looked at him sideways. "I had a pretty good idea on day one," she said. "The lights, the sounds at night, the social stuff in the common areas, that was all someone testing." The serpent was the same thing, just louder. Rovi was quiet for a moment. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that the Vreth delegation's sudden interest in the station's lower corridors was not coincidental. He had not wanted to think about what it meant. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have—" "Don't apologize," she said. "You didn't do anything wrong." She closed the notebook. "I'm going to do something about it, though." Rovi looked at her with the cautious expression of someone who is not sure whether to be reassured or worried. "What kind of something?" She smiled, which was the first time Rovi had seen her smile in a way that did not simply mean she found something interesting. "I'm going to invite them to dinner," she said. The invitation was formal. Rovi helped her write it, because station protocol for formal diplomatic invitations was complicated, and Yuna acknowledged freely that she did not know it well enough yet. But the words were hers. She invited Commander Orak and his full delegation to a cultural exchange dinner, hosted by the human representative, to be held in the shared diplomatic dining room in 3 days' time. She described it as an opportunity for cultural introduction and the sharing of food traditions. It was polite. It was correct in every point of protocol, and Aurak could not refuse it without making a diplomatic statement that would be noted and recorded by the Concorde's own administrative staff. He accepted. Yuna spent the 3 days preparing. She had to work within the limits of what ingredients were available on the station, which was not ideal. But the station's supply catalog was broader than she had expected. Interstellar trade brought in a wide range of materials from a wide range of worlds. And Earth had been exporting food goods to the Concorde's outer distribution networks for years before any human diplomat had set foot on a Concorde station. Not everything, but enough. Rovi watched her work and felt the particular unease of someone who understands that something is happening, but cannot quite determine whether it is going to be a problem. "Will this food be safe for them?" he asked on the second day, watching her sort through a collection of dried peppers she had found in a supply container clearly labeled as Earth export goods. "Perfectly safe," she said. "Won't hurt them at all." "But—" she looked at him. "Calthian biology has a pain receptor response to capsaicin compounds. Does Vreth?" Rovi pulled up his datapad and checked. He read the result. He looked at the peppers. He looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly. "Quite a strong one, according to the biological index." "Good," she said, and went back to her sorting. Rovi thought about saying something. He thought about it for quite a while. In the end, he decided that Yuna had been patient and professional and careful for the entire time she had been on this station, and that the Vreth delegation had released a 4-meter serpent into her corridor, and that perhaps on balance the universe was capable of handling what was about to happen. He helped her carry the ingredients to the dining room. The dinner was at the formal hour of the station's main cycle. The diplomatic dining room was a clean, well-lit space with a long table and chairs sized and shaped to accommodate a range of species. Aurak arrived with his full delegation, himself, Dren, and 4 others, all of them in their formal attire, frills arranged in the flat, controlled pattern that indicated official social interaction rather than threat display. They sat. They were polite, stiff, but polite. She had arranged the food herself, served in the style she had grown up with, shared dishes in the center of the table, everything placed simply, no elaborate presentation, just food, clearly made with care and skill. She had also prepared on the side a small and separate spread of milder dishes that she quietly told Rovi were for him and any of the delegation who wanted something different. Rovi appreciated this more than he could express. She served the main dishes herself, moving around the table, placing things with the ease of someone who had done this all their life. The Vreth watched her with the cautious attention of beings who knew they were in a situation they had not fully anticipated. "This is traditional food from my home region," she said, sitting down across from Aurak. "The north of my continent. Cold weather cooking. High energy, strong flavors. Please, eat." The Vreth were not going to show hesitation in front of her. That much was clear. They served themselves. The first few minutes were quiet. Aurak ate steadily, his expression controlled. Dren ate more carefully, taking small amounts. The others followed the commander's lead. It was about 4 minutes in when the heat began to register. Capsaicin does not taste like anything when it first touches a tongue. It takes a moment. It has to bind to the pain receptors before the signal travels. And then, all at once, it arrives. Not as a flavor, but as a sensation, a burning warmth that starts at the front of the mouth and moves steadily backward and outward, and does not stop. For a human raised in a culture that considered this normal, it was simply the food being what it was supposed to be. For a Vreth, who had never in their evolutionary history encountered a compound designed by an alien world to interact directly with their pain response, it was something else entirely. Across the table, frills began to shift color. The controlled, flat arrangement started to break. One of the junior delegates set down his utensils and picked up his water glass. Another made a sound that Rovi's translation unit rendered as a fairly undignified noise of surprise. Aurak ate 3 more bites. His frills were cycling through colors: deep red, pale orange, a flush of alarmed white at the edges. He was clearly using every year of his considerable composure to keep his expression steady. Sweat, or whatever the Vreth equivalent was, gathered at his temples. Dren lasted 90 seconds after the heat hit him, and then excused himself from the table in a way that was technically polite, but very clearly urgent. 2 others followed shortly after. Yuna sat across from Aurak and ate her meal. Her bowl was loaded. She ate without stopping. Her eyes were clear, her breathing normal, her expression the same calm, attentive look she gave everything. She refilled her bowl once. Aurak lasted 17 minutes from the first bite before he set down his utensils. His frills were pale and trembling slightly at the edges. He drank from his water glass 3 times. Yuna looked at him across the table. "I should have mentioned," she said pleasantly. "It's a little spicy." Aurak met her eyes. She held his gaze without blinking, without smiling, without any expression except that quiet, patient attention she always had. He said nothing. She finished her meal. Outside in the corridor, Rovi stood very still and decided that he was going to write a very long letter to his family about this assignment, because no one was going to believe him otherwise. They tried to frighten the human girl. Then she showed them how Deathworld kids play. The station talked about the dinner for a long time afterward. Not openly, not in the formal reports or the official records, where it was listed simply as a cultural exchange event with no notable incidents. But in the corridors, in the food hall, in the quiet corners where station staff and delegates spoke freely to each other, it was discussed in the way that remarkable things get discussed when people are not quite sure what category to put them in. A human had cooked for the Vreth delegation. The Vreth had left early. The human had finished her meal. That was the version that spread. It was accurate, technically, but like all short versions of real things, it missed the weight of the actual moment. The 17 minutes, the pale frills, the way Aurak had looked at Yuna across the table, and she had simply looked back. Dren did not come to the monitoring room the following morning, or the morning after. Rovi, who had his own sources among the station staff, quietly informed Yuna that the surveillance on her quarters and movement patterns appeared to have stopped. She nodded when he told her, unsurprised. Aurak's delegation reduced their visible presence in her regular areas of the station. They were still there. The Vreth were not the type to leave an assignment early, but they no longer positioned themselves in her path, no longer watched from corners, no longer made their attention known. It was a withdrawal that communicated something without saying it. They had decided to stop. Yuna let 3 days pass before she did anything about it. On the 4th morning, she went to the observation deck earlier than usual, before the station's main cycle had fully begun, and the corridors were still quiet. The observation deck was a large, open room with a curved viewport that ran the full length of one wall, looking out over open space, stars in every direction, the distant smear of a nebula to the lower left, one of the Concorde's freight haulers moving slowly across the middle distance, with its running lights blinking in the dark. She stood at the viewport, with her hands in her jacket pockets, and watched. She had been there about 20 minutes when she heard footsteps behind her, heavy, deliberate, the particular sound of someone who was choosing to announce themselves rather than arrive quietly. She did not turn around. She heard the footsteps stop, heard the stillness that followed. Then Aurak spoke. "I would like to speak with you." "I know," she said. "That's why you came." Another pause. He moved to stand beside her at the viewport, keeping a respectful distance, which was itself a statement. Vreth did not naturally think about respectful distance in that way. They calculated it, but it did not come from instinct. That he had done it meant he had thought about this conversation beforehand. She looked at him sideways. His frills were flat and still, the same as they had been when she had first seen him, the controlled, neutral state. But there was something different about it now. Before, it had been the control of dominance, of someone managing the room around them. Now it was the control of someone being careful. They were both quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. "Your frills are very still," she said. "Yes," he said. "What does that mean, when they're like that?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "In our language, it is called wealth. There is no single word for it in the Concord trade language. The closest meaning is attention without intent. To look at something and not yet know what you are going to do about it." Yuna thought about that. Like being curious without a plan. "Yes," he said, as though she had said something more precise than he expected. "Exactly like that." Another silence. Outside, the freight hauler continued its slow path across the dark. "I did not come to apologize," he said. "I know. It is not something we do easily." "Okay," she said simply, which seemed to take some of the weight out of the air. Orac's frills shifted, not dramatically, just a slight, slow movement, like something settling. He looked at the stars for a moment. Then he said, "I want to understand something. The serpent in the corridor." "Yes." "You were not afraid." It was not a question. It was the thing he had come to understand, and he was saying it out loud to hear whether it sounded right. "I was alert," she said. "That's different." "Explain the difference." She thought about it. "Fear is what happens when danger surprises you. When it shows up somewhere you didn't expect it, and you don't know what it is yet." She paused. "Alert is what happens when you already know the world is dangerous. When you've spent enough time in it, that danger isn't a surprise anymore. It's just a thing that's there, and you handle it." Orac was quiet for a long time. "On Earth," he said slowly, "you grow up like this. Yes, all of you." "Everyone I know," she said. "My mother, my father, my uncle, the people from my town. You grow up learning that the world will try to kill you in 100 different ways, and you learn the ways. You learn how to read them. You get good at handling them, and after a while, the fear doesn't go away, but it gets smaller, and the part of you that knows what to do gets much bigger." Orac processed that for a long time. She let him, because she had learned in the past weeks that he was not a creature who rushed through ideas. "The Vreth are afraid of very little," he said eventually. "But what we fear deeply. A Vreth who fears something it is not a thing we discuss, it is treated as a flaw." "That sounds exhausting," she said. For the first time since she had arrived on the station, his frills moved in a way she had not seen before. Not aggressive, not alarmed, not neutral. They shifted to a pale gold color and went very slightly wide, the edges catching the starlight. Rovi, she learned much later, would have recognized it immediately. It was the Vreth expression for something that had no direct translation, but the closest equivalent, in any language the Concord used, was simply, "I hear you." "You are not what I expected," Orac said. "Nobody ever is," she said. They stood together at the viewport for a long while after that, the human girl and the Vreth commander, neither of them speaking. The nebula in the lower left drifted almost imperceptibly as the station turned on its long, slow axis. Stars moved in the way stars always move. So slowly that you only notice if you stay still long enough, and are patient enough, and care enough to keep watching. Orac's frills stayed pale gold the entire time. Rovi found out about the conversation the same way he found out about most things on the station. From station staff, who had seen it on the corridor monitoring feeds and passed it along. He sat with the information for a whole afternoon, turning it over. He thought about the girl who had walked off the transit pod 3 weeks ago and said, "Cool colors," and a full-breath threat display. The girl who slept through the sounds and fixed the lights and picked up a 4-meter serpent with a jacket wrapped around her arm and steady hands. The girl who had cooked a meal so precise in its intention that it needed no explanation and eaten it across from the most powerful Vreth on the station, and simply watched him with those quiet, patient eyes until he looked away first. He thought about what she had said to him on the very first night, standing in the food hall with a plate of warm, metallic-tasting food. "Then nobody has any bad habits about us yet." He understood it now. She had known exactly what she was, the first human on this station, the first impression of her entire species, walking into a place full of beings who had read the files but never met the reality. She had known she would be tested. She had known that some of those tests would be hostile. She had prepared for all of it not by hardening herself or performing strength, but simply by being completely, unflinchingly what she already was. Rovi filed his weekly report to the Concord Administrative Office that evening. In the section marked Representative Assessment, he wrote what he believed to be true. The human representative Yuna has in 3 weeks' time established working relationships across 11 separate species groups, resolved 1 significant security incident without staff assistance, identified and neutralized a sustained harassment campaign through non-confrontational means, and conducted 1 informal diplomatic engagement that has resulted in a measurable shift in the Vreth delegation's posture toward the human representative and, by extension, toward humanity broadly. He paused. Then he added 1 more line. "I recommend that we bring more of them." In the observation deck, Yuna was still there as the station rolled into its night cycle, and the lights dimmed and the stars outside the viewport grew brighter by contrast. She had her notebook open, and she was writing in it, small, careful writing, the same as always. She was noting the things she had learned, the layout of the station, the habits of the staff, the customs of the species she had spent 3 weeks watching, the way frills communicated things that words didn't, the way certain sounds at night were less frightening once you knew what made them, the way food could say something true about a person or a people that a formal diplomatic statement never could. She filled 2 pages. Then she closed the notebook and put it away. She looked out at the stars for a while longer. She was 23 years old, born in a place where the winter was long and the wildlife was large, and danger was not a surprise, but simply a fact of the landscape. She had been sent here because the Concord needed a representative, and her government had decided she was ready. She had come prepared to learn, to observe, to handle what came. And what had come, the frills, the sounds, the serpent, the whole careful architecture of fear that someone had tried to build around her, had been nothing more than another landscape. Unfamiliar, but readable, handleable, another version of the world doing what the world always did. She had mapped it, she had learned it, she had fixed the flickering lights with a borrowed tool, and held the snake with steady hands, and cooked a meal that said what needed to be said without a single diplomatic word. She was the first human on this station. She had already decided she would not be the last. Outside, the stars held still, and the station turned slowly in the dark. And Yuna sat in the quiet observation deck and thought about what she would do tomorrow. She was already looking forward to it.